I want to turn to the students and say that, you know, at Cornell, we put a lot of weight on our core values, and we aspire to be an inclusive and welcoming environment or campus. And we know that that's difficult. That takes a lot of work. It is not always successful. There are ways in which these sort of inequalities very much fracture our own community. So I'm so grateful to these students who will speak shortly for their work. It's not always easy to contribute parts of yourself, and the responses to our call for submissions on notions of race and racism in our own context of the university, and how the experience of crossing a border has caused or forced people to reflect on their own notions of self-identity or of broader structures of race and racism. That response was really quite overwhelming, and provided a lot of food for thought for us to think about what this looks like in our own context. The pandemic, you know, has highlighted these longstanding injustices and has really deepened, as Nanjala was saying at the end, this throughout, but particularly at the end, this precarious position of migrants. The way that people draw on these very long held nativist beliefs, so these aren't new beliefs, right? But they come out in these new and particularly violent ways in the context of fear and uncertainty. So that crossing borders is always fraught, and many of you point that out in your essays, but it's 100 times harder in the context of this incredible insecurity and the racialized or violent assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't. So thank you to the students who are presenting today. I won't go on because we have 6 students who have agreed to present their work, and I will turn it over to you to present. I think you know the order that you're going in, and if you would briefly introduce yourself at the beginning of your presentation, that would be wonderful. And I'll turn it over to Ekaterina.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm really humbled and honored to follow such a wonderful speaker with my work. My name is Ekaterina, but I go by Kath. I'm a graduate student in applied math, and I come from Russia. And I study models of climate and a little bit of science. I'm still figuring out sort of what my thesis will be about. But today we'll be reading my essay called Entering America. From a young age, my Russian parents instilled in me that there are few things worse than not having the right papers. My father traveled with thick folders of supplementary materials. A passport was just the beginning. Passport control was a trial, and during that trial, any document from birth certificate to apartment title could be requested, reviewed, and rejected. Crossing the border was a game of chance rigged against us. You had to count yourself lucky, grateful if you made it through. Passport control is a test, a regular test in my life, but too high stakes to be routine. When my flight would land in JFK, the passengers would be separated into citizens, green card holders, and then the third most winding line to the gatekeepers, to which I was always consigned. And when the time of my brief audience would come, I would try to look my most law-abiding and amiable. My existence is reduced to the documents, and the ostensible exercise is to match the documents. I start performing the paper version of myself. I take my glasses off to match my photograph. I give bland answers to what I study. I prove my English proficiency. I meekly thank the agent for the advice to study more and party less. As I press my thumb to the fingerprint scanner in just the correct way, I myself feel flattened, reduced, going through a narrow bottleneck, waiting to be allowed to become a person again. Until then, I am the platonic ideal of a student, with my eyes set on the American dream, looking past the detail that I won't be allowed to stay past my own graduation. I am unremarkable and unexceptional. I am but the physical manifestation of a folder of papers, because personhood is bestowed only on those who pass the test. Passport control is a test, and once I'm in it, the papers that seemed all important feel silly. They are an amulet, a charm, and having faith in them was an act of superstition. Under the scrutiny of a border agent, I am suspect, and so is every crease on my I-20 form, every smudged arrival stamp in my passport. I wait for an impossibly long time. I am waved through. The border agent assumes a fake accent and tells me not to drink too much vodka. I swallow my pride and scuttle to pick up my luggage. Once again, I am lucky. Once again, I made it through. Once again, I am grateful. I feel a relief, but I feel smaller for it. For 11 years, I have been required to depart annually to renew my F1 visa. Every time I re-enter this country, I am asked who I am and why I deserve to continue living the life I have built. The question and the threat echo year after year and stay with me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it is so beautifully written and so powerfully told. Thank you. And now we'll move to our next presenter.
Hi everyone, I'm Tina. I'm starting my MFA in Creative Visual Arts at Cornell for my second year, and I'm going to graduate next May. And I'm from Canada, and my parents are from Cambodia. And I will read you the essay that I wrote for this wonderful initiative. All right. So I recall I was a naive 8-year-old the first time I internally struggled with the notion of identity. Walking back from school, my younger sister shared with me that her kindergarten teacher had asked the student to talk about where they came from. When her turn came to reply, she enthusiastically yelled out, "I'm Haitian," upon which her classmate began to roar in laughter, sneer, and retort loudly, "No, you are not. You are Chinese." She had been deeply troubled by the brash remark. She had but innocently repeated what the 3 previous students had replied. Why was she ridiculed while the 3 others answered was approved by the rest of the class? When I began kindergarten, I did not speak the language of the dominant culture where I was born. My mom described the refugee camps where she stayed in Cambodia as a frenzied auction house where various countries would issue sign-up sheets in order to claim the dispossessed. The sole rumor she heard about Canada, about Montreal, was that people lose their ears and their nose from frost, but that gamble still immeasurably outweighed what she had previously endured. We grew up in an ethnic ghetto, rich in cultural heritages, making us take for granted that people do not look the same. Our neighbors were grateful and therefore kind. My first day of elementary school marked me. I learned that we were not all equal. The teachers instructed a few students to stand apart from the rest of us while calling out attendance. All the other students, myself included, stared quizzically at this smaller faction. Within the ostracized, a churning embarrassment suffused the faces of the older ones, an affliction that years later I would learn to recognize as humiliation. These students were cast aside into the French as second language classroom, and those who escaped over the years to integrate the regular classes made it a point of pride to remind those around that they were now like everyone else, repressing the distress of having been subjected to inferiority. I again witnessed this casual linguistic hazing when we moved to Ottawa to learn English. I palpably felt the anguish, the wish to make yourself small, invisible. Despite the best intentions and the preaching of diversity, the meaning of difference is taught early on at school. The violence of imposed alterity, the othering of the discriminating gaze scars deeply. Oftentimes, the latter is introduced at a much younger age than most are willing to admit, especially because the truth is often too conflicting to accept. The divide is real between those privileged to be recognized with esteem for voicing their truth and those who are indifferently erased by being subjected into silence. Children learn that difference is deleterious, and the society in which they grow up reaffirms their fears. If there is any hope for difference, it should begin with an informed education. That onus rests with those who impart knowledge at school, but most crucially, with those at home. Thanks.
Thank you, Tina. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Onyinye Akujo, and I am with the Cornell Johnson EMBA class of 2022, and I'm also the chair of the Emerging Markets Institute here, also at Cornell. Today, I'll be reading Systemic Racism in the Workplace, A Cry. In my life, I have on rose-colored glasses. I grew up seeing only opportunity and no employment fascist. However, through systemic racism, all A's, no matter how hard the classes, I am told I got into the Ivy because of affirmative action. I come with education, however, I'm not seen as qualified. I come through my experience, yet see the rejection with lies. I'm sorry you were not qualified enough, or please try again next year. However, I see my lighter hue counterparts being hired with less. To think that I have the audacity to have pride in my chest. As a woman, I'm told to not be emotional. As a person of color, I've battled with imposter syndrome. At work, I want ambition, and others see attack. However, because of the color of my skin, is there something that I lack? Am I not worth the same as my white counterparts? Maybe it's because I'm Black, so I decided to straighten my beautiful Afro curls. Had to reserve my bravado, smile all the time with my teeth and put on the pearls, strangle my throat with dissimulation, which is the only thing to get me through this racially skewed world. While I suffer in silence, what we need right now is allyship. When you see me struggling at work, support me at the hip. When you are in a space of privilege, provide the avenue for growth. Don't just sit back and watch as I go for broke. Help me to speak up when others can't see how poor diversity employment practices are affecting people like me. Stand up and let's start with the inequities. Then let me challenge you to involve me in your opportunities. I need the inclusivity. Pay me in equity, promote me, support us, support diversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Beautiful poetry and so powerful. Valeria.
Hi, I'm Valeria, and I'm a nutritional science major. I'm a sophomore currently from South Texas. So my essay is called Recognizing Who We Are. Coming from a small suburban town on the southern border of Texas filled with Latinos and thriving on Mexican culture, I never understood what being in a white-dominated city was like. I grew up in Mexico and moved to the United States at the age of 6. Moving to the United States was a drastic change that I was excited for, but nothing like the change I experienced coming to college in New York. When I came to Cornell, seeing the diversity of Asians, Blacks, Whites, and Latinos was eye-opening and fascinating. It was beautiful. However, as I began to speak to more people, I began to notice the social dynamics of the school. People separated themselves into talking to people of their own race or color, and I could not understand why this occurred. Before I decided to commit to Cornell, I visited the campus for diversity hosting. I was hosted by a Black female who I thought was sweet and overall beautiful. I truly looked up to her. Yet she only hung out with other Blacks and began to describe to me how white people did not welcome her enough and were not her friends. I assumed she was overreacting and there was no way this was real. Yet I was mistaken. Coming in, I made friends with whoever I thought was sweet and welcoming, and I did not see race or color. However, as a sophomore, I realized now that most of my friends ended up being of minority races. When I realized this, I understood that I was not aware that racism was truly existent and affected many and would therefore affect me as well. As I continued to observe this, I realized that the world is flawed and unaware of its flaws. Before I stopped to think, I did not notice the dynamic of my friend group even once as a freshman, as I was oblivious to racism, and now I realize that I truly stand with the minority race. The people I have met at the school have opened my eyes to the problems within our nation, and I recognize that this is a conflict that needs to be addressed. For 17 years of my life, I was closeted in a bubble of Latinos who welcomed me at every corner, and I had no awareness of racism. This is not true of everywhere else. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Samiha, and I'm a graduate student studying global development, international agriculture, and indigenous studies. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for allowing us this opportunity, and thanks to all the student presenters as well. I know it's not easy to share some of this stuff. So I'll be sharing a short poem and a short essay. And this poem was inspired by a Palestinian resistance writer named Sami Al-Qasim from his poem, Address to the Unemployment Bureau. We are the waterless ocean, the wingless bird, the scaleless snake who creeps, whose waves keep crashing down, down. All faces but mine, torn away from homes we never knew, our histories as foreign countries, as borders erased and militarized, as imaginary as the ones we cross today. We fill ourselves so that we may be, our self-imposed shackles that bind us to emptiness. We break, we resist to the final pulse in our veins. In Panama, I was La Gringa. In the US, I'm often seen as Indian. In Pakistan, some might call me a Gori. All of these and none of these are true. Every day, I decide whether to cross a dangerous border within me or to reside in a comfortable yet slightly ignorant position. Do I choose to recall the pain and trauma caused by the deaths of colonization, by the insidious roots of white supremacy, and by the subjective system of othering? Do I engage with the thought of not feeling Pakistani nor American? Can I even walk away? Or are we confronted with the history of white supremacy and colonization in everything we do? Do we, especially people of color across borders, have the privilege of escaping this? This racism is not an isolated concept or incident. The history and ubiquitous nature of colonization flows through our veins. Only through acknowledging this collective trauma can we progress towards collective liberation. My experiences abroad, especially in a rural community in Panama, taught me more than anything about community and solidarity. It taught me that maybe the injustice we see is based on othering, on deciding that someone is inherently not like us, is different and unworthy of understanding. My community in Panama acknowledged me as an outsider, but more so, they acknowledged me as one of them, as a necessary member of the community. This transcended language barriers and imaginary borders. My identity as a Pakistani American is more than just an identity. It's a way for me to cling to a culture and a home that I've been ripped and isolated from, one that I've never known. It's a way for me to build the bridge across the warring borders within me. Walls were raised around me the moment that Britain's 100+ year colonial rule of what is now Pakistan began. This belief that any one being is supreme over another and that structural racism are root causes of racism and violence. They're ones that transcend borders. It is these beliefs that exploit the vulnerable, the tired, the pauperized, the sick, in search of greater power, power that seeks to erase a rich cultural history and violently tear families apart. In working towards collective liberation from these self-imposed shackles, we resist. We resist in solidarity across imaginary borders. We resist with the Palestinian Intifada. We resist to end SARS in Nigeria. We resist with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Dwayne Wright, and the millions that go unnamed. We resist with the Uyghur Muslims. We resist it all with our inherent sovereignty to the final pulse in our veins. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alexandra and I'm a sophomore at Cornell majoring in human biology, health and society, and I'll be sharing the poem that I wrote today, and it's titled One Summer. I eat rice with a spoon and Cheetos with chopsticks. I watch the Yang Yang and listen to Ed Sheeran. My identities as an Asian and American are interconnected and intertwined. I grew up in a community where the color of our skin and the foods we brought for lunch were numerous and diverse. I never stuck out because we all did. People from all backgrounds and walks of life filled the hallways of my school. One summer, I went on a road trip with my family. We stopped at a nearby Walmart, and suddenly I felt alien. Customers looked my mom and I up and down. They stared whenever we spoke Chinese, making me feel self-conscious of my Asian heritage for the first time in my life. Since then, I became more aware of how Asian I was with my friends and how American I was with my family. Suddenly, it felt like two identities that I couldn't reconcile, like oil and water. But then one summer, movie posters and magazine covers of the cast of Crazy Rich Asians filled the shelves of stores like that one Walmart. Suddenly, I didn't feel so alien anymore. Constance Wu and Awkwafina were stars that looked like me, the faces of a Hollywood movie with an all-Asian cast. That was the first summer where I saw my parents excited to go to the movie theater, but that wasn't the last summer. The Farewell came out next, and once again, my parents giddily bought tickets for a movie with stars that looked like us. Since then, I am still aware of how Asian I am with my friends and how American I am with my family. But now there are two identities that complement one another, like peanut butter and jelly. I am Asian American and proud. Thank you.
Thank you so much to each of our essay and poetry participants. It was really an honor to read your work, and we've shared the link to everyone's bio and written submission in the chat, so please do feel free to take a look. And I wanted to really congratulate everyone for your work and also just say thank you for participating in this conversation around race and racism across borders. We'll continue to host a series of events through our Migrations Initiative, as well as through our Global Racial Justice Research Priority at the Einaudi Center for International Studies. And we invite you to join our listserv and to follow along to make sure that we continue to stay in conversation. Thank you everyone so much, and take good care.